this is a dramatic change in Jewish attitudes to body culture occurred during the start of the Enlightenment at the end of the 17th century. The European Enlightenment revived the classical Greek system of values. The Judeo-Christian theoretical conception was replaced by an anthropocentric moral system which placed in the human being and his needs at the center. The human was a rational being who must examine all phenomena using his brain rather than be changed to a system of beliefs and opinion dictated by political and religious institutes. Placing the human being at the center, where his life is not merely a passage to the next world, but whose purpose lies to this world, again, re-emphasize the moral consideration of the individual's physical needs and leisure activities. During the Industrial Revolution, the decrease of the hard physical labor led to increase the leisure time. This marked the beginning of the modern development of physical education in schools and the diverse types of sports. The Jewish Enlightenment movement, which developed alongside the European counterpart, attempt to normalize the diaspora Jews' life. The social, economic, and national changes that occurred in the Europe as a result of the Enlightenment produced cracks in the traditional framework of the Jewish community. The world surrounding the Jews was no longer a Christian world within which the Jewish community resided, but rather a world of nation states whose Jewish inhabitants gradually became citizens and equal rights, and in whose framework Jews could work and succeed. The community was no longer the Jewish dominant educational factor, and he was now free to search for other self-determining definitions of Jewish identity. As a result, at the start of the 18th century, diverse Jewish identities began to take shape, which oftentimes conflicted with one another, each claiming to have the best chances of creating the most promoting future for the Jewish people. These diverse Jewish identities led to different attitudes towards body culture in general, especially to sport. The various expression of these Jewish identities and the different attitudes towards body culture as expressed by the various Jewish streams will be discussed next. The concept promoted by the Enlightenment and the liberalism, the growth of modern states, and above all, the emancipation granted to Jews in the Central and Western Europe, led to integration of Jews in all spheres of life in Europe. Jews fitting into the field of economics, the Rothschild and the Hirsch family, for example, the free professions, culture, Mendelssohn, Mahler, Kafka, Stefan Zweig, and science, Einstein and Freud, for example. This integration led Jews to question their Jewish identity within the new reality. Jews who, until this time, easily defined themselves in light of their economic, social, and religious differences, now had to search for a way to define their identity that would apply both to their unique Jewish status as well as their inclusion in the ruling majority. The new definitions that emerged were not uniform, and several integration patterns can be identified. One, complete assimilation. Many Jews completely assimilated into their surrounded environment, severed all ties with their Jewish environment, and denied their Judaism. Some of them even choose to convert to Christianity. Two, national assimilation while preserving ties to the Jewish religion. These Jews tried to distinguish between their religious and national identities. They considered themselves part of the nation into which they had integrated and claimed that their Judaism was merely a religious framework. Just as there were Catholic Germans, Protestant Germans, etc., they were Jewish Germans. This was the setting in which the Reform movement, very actual in those days, was born, with its emphasis on the universal elements in the Jewish religion. 3. Preservation of national identity within a civil national framework. These Jews tried to preserve their Jewish national identity, which was not necessarily related to the Jewish religion or territorial self-definition. The supposition was that distinction should be made between ethnic culture identity and civil natural identity. This concept was difficult to implement in states with tribal national association, such as Germany, but in states whose national and civilian identity were one and the same, such as France, especially the United States, this could be a shift. In terms of sport, there was actually no difference among these various Jewish identities. Jews consider themselves part of the general society, and therefore their integration in body culture was part of the mobility processes Jews experienced in general society, especially as part of the urban middle class to which many Jews belonged in Central and Western Europe. Many Jews joined the German gymnastic movement, and many excelled in competitive sports in countries where they began to develop. The Platov brothers, the Jewish gymnastic who represent Germany in the first Olympic Games in Athens. Alfred Gutmann from Hungary, who won 2 gold medals in those games, and dozens of other outstanding Jewish athletes represented their countries with pride. Socialism and communism. During the 19th and 20th centuries, socialist philosophy developed throughout Europe, especially as a result of industrial revolution and winding social gaps. The concept of a new egalitarian society, free of oppressors and oppressed, resonated loudly in the Tsarist Russia, where lack of democracy, large social gaps, and economic background were especially salient in relation to Central and Western Europe. This concept captivated many Jews, especially in Russia. A revolution which would overthrow the Tsarist regime and create social revolution in Russia could also resolve the civil discrimination and social and economic distress suffered by Russian Jews. Jews chose to join socialist movement in 2 main ways. The first one was to completely merge within the general movements and struggle side by side with them for social changes. Considering the fact that socialism by its nature is cosmopolitan rather than national, joining general movement corresponded with this concept. Emphasis was not placed on the unique Jewish problem, but rather on the general struggle of the working class. The relatively large number of Jews found in the Bolshevik revolutionary leadership, Trotsky, Zinoviev, Kamenev, etc., testified to this approach. A second form of joint socialist movement was action within the special Jewish framework, in light of the increasing number of working class Jews in Eastern Europe. The most prominent labor organization in Eastern Europe was the Bund. Its basic philosophy advocated fighting for the class interests rather than the national needs of Jewish workers. It quickly became clear that the Bund could not disengage itself from the Jewish national issue, and offering Jews a class struggle without taking into account the unique Jewish situation was into account, that unique Jewish situation was problematic. The Bund defined Judaism as culture. This is its main objective, was to achieve cultural autonomy in the utopian socialist state that would arise, and preserve the Jewish culture that had developed in the Yiddish language, which was created in the diaspora in opposition to territorial nationalism and the Hebrew language. At first, this socialist concept found no expression in sports. Autocratic rule by the Tsars did not permit free organization and banned the founding of gymnastic unions that were perceived as a means for national awakening. In any case, Jews tended not to engage in much physical activity at that time. Practical expression of this appeared only after the Bolshevik Revolution and World War I. The Bolsheviks also did not permit the establishment of unions with a national basis, although sport was cultivated by the regime with the purpose of creating a new Soviet citizen. Jewish integration as individuals into the new Soviet Union system led to the inclusion of Jewish in this phenomenon as well, for as individuals they were now proper citizens of the Soviet Union. Jewish socialist sport unions, where aim was to introduce Jewish youth to these ideas, were established between the two world wars, mainly in Poland. Poland was at the time the country with the largest number of Jews, and therefore became the main arena for the various Jewish streams. The Bund movement found a large sport union for workers called the Morgenstern, Morning Star, in Poland, which competed in the Jewish community against the Zionist Maccabi, at a certain period against the socialist Zionist Apoel. Jewish nationalism. The influence of the awakening of national movement in Europe, the growth of the modern anti-Semitism in Central and Western Europe, and the persecution of Jews in Eastern Europe led many Jews to adopt national concepts of Jewish self-definition. The basic philosophy of these Jews maintained that anti-Semitism would not allow the full integration of Jews in their countries, and since Jews constituted a nation, they had a struggle for self-definition like any other nation. The nature of self-definition was not accepted by consensus. Some claim that Jewish national autonomy should be sought in each country. Others claim that suitable territories had to be found for the establishment of a Jewish state. The national solution accepted by the majority was the Zionist solution, which meant the establishment of Jewish homeland in Eretz Israel, the historic homeland of the Jewish people. The Zionist solution at first seems unrealistic due to the problem of acquiring territory under Ottoman control, and which had an Arab majority. Yet political circumstances at the end of the 19th century, and especially the change that occurred following World War I, made it possible when the British received the mandate for Palestine and expressed a commitment to establishment a national homeland in it. More than any other identity, national identity influenced the creation of the Jewish sport. Instead of integrating Jews in sport within their countries, the intention was to establish national sport unions like those in Central Europe, such as the German Gymnastic Union, the Deutsche Turnerschaft, and the Chess Sokol. The Jewish national movement, and mainly the Zionist movement, emphasized the formation for a new Jew who differed from the image of the traditional diaspora Jew, rejecting the diaspora meant negating anything related to it, and forming a new Muscal Jew, different from the perception of the frail Eastern European Jew. This is a new Jew. a model of a new. It is interesting to note that when Jewish sport unions were first established, they were aimed at all Jews with national, not just Zionist, awareness, including Jews who maintained their Jewish nationality within their civilian nationality. Member of the Berlin Bar Kochva Union, 1898, and later the Jewish Gymnastic Union, founded in 1903, during the Sixth Zionist Congress, were mostly Zionist, yet they did not define themselves as such in their aims and allowed any Jew with a national identity to join. Only after World War I did national mapping became clear. The Maccabi Union, which was established shortly after World War I, 1921, defined itself as Zionist and served as a means for attracting Jewish youth to the Zionist movement. At the same time, national Jewish unions did not define themselves in Zionist terms, were also formed, such as the Shield, which represented the discharged Jewish soldiers in Germany. In Palestine, additional unions, Apoel, Beitar, Elitzur, were established. However, this did not reflect different Jewish identities, but instead represent political camps that held different ideas about realizing the Zionist dreams. Summary. The Enlightenment in the early modern period led to a dramatic change with the Jewish people. Instead of one religion entity, diverse Jewish identities formed, each claiming to faithfully reflect to one Jewish entity that would ensure the Jewish for an optimal future. Some integrated into the ruling majority in various ways. Some preferred integration in socialist movement and found an answer to the Jewish question in the World Revolution. Others claim national self-definition, most notably the Zionist movement. The divergent Jewish identity led to diverse approaches to body culture. Each one utilized aspect of body culture for its need by integrating within the gymnastic and sport movement established in each state and by means of gymnastic and sport union that express their unique identity. Thank you.